use a wide range of saws in roundwood timber framing, from chainsaws for actually felling the timber and cross-cutting, a small battery Makita chainsaws for more detailed work, and in particular Japanese saws for ripping down the grain when we're opening up pegs for putting in wedges, and for flush cutting, and for real detailed sawing of the joints. Debarking spades are used for peeling the bark off. There's a range of different styles, but we tend to use this D-shaped debarker, which is ideal for peeling poles when they're freshly felled. We also use draw knives, again for more detailed peeling and for working sections of oak down ready for peg making, or for putting a flat on a large roundwood pole before putting a mortise joint into it. Rounding planes, we use a variety of rounding planes. Particular sizes we use 1 inch, 3/4 and 5/8 of an inch, and those are used for peg making. For cutting mortises, we do use chisels, but we also use chain mortises. These are like a chainsaw that actually can be clamped onto the beam and then are used to dig out the wood to make a mortise hole. They're very accurate, and one can get a very clean edged mortise cut into the pole with these. We use side axes for when we want to point up any poles, but also for squaring off one flat face on a round pole. They come as left or right-handed, and you need to be sure that you don't try and use a left-handed one when you're right-handed, or vice versa, or you'll just dig into the timber. Throws we use for cleaving timber. This is for splitting roundwood poles in half by prising the fibres apart rather than actually cutting into the fibres. It's a much stronger way of breaking wood down into smaller sections. Chisels, we use gouge chisels for cutting the curves around joints, in particular the butter pat joint. And we have a range of different framing chisels, varying from about 3/4 of an inch up to about 2 inch. A 2 inch framing chisel is probably the most versatile for most of the joints we do. When it comes to drilling out, we use a variety of different types of drills, from the 2-stroke petrol drill, which is very useful when you're sort of high up on a building and away from any source of power. The Mafel HB1E, which is an incredibly powerful torque drill which just keeps on turning through wood, however thick the beam is. And we use Scotch eye augers, which are hand drills, which again work very efficiently at taking out a nice clean hole for a beam. Favourite auger bits are the wood owl. This is a tri-cut auger bit, really good at removing the waste and not getting clogged up as you work your way through a large beam, especially with greenwood. For turning timber we use cant hooks. We also use them when we come to frame raising for just supporting by putting a little bit of pressure on the base of one of the feet of the cruck as the raise starts to begin. We use simple trestles, which we make up on site, or carpenter's stools as they're known, and these are used for a variety of activities, for clamping a beam to or ratcheting a beam to during the framing process. We use tripods for a number of different uses for lifting. With a chain block on them, we can lift up and down a pole with relative ease with just one hand. We use a variety of clamps, from long sash clamps down to smaller G clamps. Timber dogs and timber puppies are used for securing round poles into place while we're working on them. They're like a giant staple, and each end is temporarily hammered into one pole and then secured down onto another one. And a pair of timber dogs makes a very secure fixing for what was a wobbly roundwood pole. For vices, we tend to use the super jaws vices. These are three-legged, which means they're very stable on uneven ground, and fitted with roundwood jaws, they're incredibly strong for clamping timber in place while we're working on it. Framing pins are used once we've drilled out holes for temporarily dropping in the equivalent of a peg through the hole we've drilled out for a joint. This is really useful when you're moving a frame around and reassembling it. You can put all the framing pins in place and clamp the frame back up before you then actually secure it with pegs while it's in its final position. We use a number of different levels for different uses, especially when we're laying out the site. A basic builder's level we use for surveying the pad stones to get our datum point and all the different measurements and levels which we end up cutting the feet of the frames to. We use mini levels for checking the flatness of any surface we're flattening out, for example on a wall plate when we need to flatten it out in 3 or 4 places to receive tenons coming up from jowl posts. We use tools such as the Leica Disto for making distance measurements, angle measurements, checking angles of roof pitch. And we use a crosswire laser level for marking the feet to know the exact position and angle to cut the feet on so they come up flat on the pad stones when we raise the building. Traditional chalk line is used for pinging a line across a roundwood pole to give us a line from which we can measure from for calculating all the distances on the building. We use a number of different squares, from small engineer's squares right the way up to flexible Japanese squares which will bend a bit and therefore are very useful when marking a right angle on a roundwood pole. Log scribers or scribing tools are a key part of marking up for any joint we're about to cut. The log scriber is used to transfer the profile of one log onto the other. This means that when the 2 pieces of wood come together, we get a perfect fit between the 2 curves. The profile gauge is used especially when we're cutting the shape of the floorboards around the poles as they work their way from the ground up through the floor into the building. And this will mirror the image and angle of a cracked pole which we can then transfer down onto the floorboards. For frame raising we use large tripods and onto these we attach a snatch block, and through the snatch block we'll run the cable onto a winch which is then attached by strops either to a tree or to a vehicle to enable us to raise the frame. We use a number of different strops and shackles, and making sure they're all load tested and checked prior to any raise is an essential part of safety before we raise the buildings. Another winch we use is the little worn poolsaw. This is a battery winch, very useful for shifting the frames once they're up, just a few millimetres one way or another to check they're lining up perfectly. I use a tall neck water-cooled grindstone for doing all the sharpening on the chisels. It's an excellent and very accurate sharpener which you can preset all the angles on to make sure you're getting a perfect bevel on your chisel.